The siege of the outpost. As dawn broke over the horizon, a sense of impending doom hung heavily over the outpost. The first rays of sunlight, usually a symbol of hope, today seemed to herald the advance of a dark tide. Lucan, Captain Harris, and Commander Lewis, alongside all members of the wolf pack, were tensely preparing for the assault they knew was coming. A massive invasion led by Eldur's undead army. The outpost had been fortified to the best of their abilities, but as the distant rumble of thousands of undead feet marching in unison became audible, even the bravest hearts among them felt a chill. Eldur's undead army, a seemingly unstoppable force, advanced with the precision of a well-oiled machine. At the forefront were the undead warriors, Eldur's elite, each one trained to fight with ruthless efficiency. As the horde approached, the defenders of the outpost took their positions. Lucan roared orders, trying to bolster the morale of the Lycan fighters who stood ready to protect their home and their human allies. Captain Harris and Commander Lewis coordinated the human defenses, their faces set in grim determination. The first wave of the undead crashed against the outpost's defenses like a tidal wave against the cliffs. The sounds of battle roared through the air, metal clashing, snarls, and the cries of the fallen. Despite their valiant efforts and strategic planning, the outpost's defenders quickly realized they were outmatched. The undead warriors, skilled and numerous, tore through the barricades with horrifying ease. The wolf pack fought with a primal ferocity, their teeth and claws stained with the decay of their foes, but even their supernatural strength was not enough. One by one they fell, overwhelmed by the sheer numbers and the relentless assault of the undead. Lucan, his fur matted with blood, fought desperately at the front lines, his heart sinking as he saw his packmates overwhelmed. Inside the command center, Captain Harris and Commander Lewis watched in horror through the surveillance monitors. The images before them spoke of a battle turning into a massacre. The outpost, so full of life and hope just hours before, was now on the verge of a complete destruction. From a vantage point, Eldur and Sarana watched the destruction unfold with gleeful smiles. Their faces, illuminated by the fires of the burning outpost, the success of their undead warriors filled them with a dark joy. Each scream of despair from the outpost a note in their symphony of destruction. The outpost, once a bustling haven of cooperation and resistance, was now being torn apart. Buildings that had stood as symbols of human and Lycan resilience were now ablaze or crumbling under the onslaught. The defenders, despite their bravery and determination, were being pushed back, their lines breaking under the ceaseless waves of undead. This chapter in the story of the outpost was one of desperation and helplessness, a stark display of the raw power Eldur wielded, and a grim reminder of the potential fate of all those who stood against him. The survivors, those few who still stood, were forced to retreat further into the heart of the outpost, their eyes haunted by the loss of their comrades and the potential end of their cause. As the outpost defences crumbled under the relentless assault, every remaining person, hardened by desperation, grasped any weapon they could find. The air was thick with despair and the stench of defeat. Among the defenders, the feeling of hopelessness was palpable as they watched their friends and fellow fighters fall one by one to the unstoppable undead horde. The remaining Lycan, bloodied and beaten, lay scattered across the outpost, their strength dwindling. Lucan, grievously injured but still resolute, retreated with Captain Harris to the last safe point within the outpost. "We make our last stand here," Captain Harris declared, his voice rough with fatigue and determination. "Even in the face of overwhelming odds, we must fight. We must not give in. Until our last breath, we must believe. We must have hope, he implored, trying to ignite a flicker of resolve in the eyes of those who remained. His words were meant to inspire, but the wave of undead advancing towards them seemed like an insurmountable tide, drowning out all but the faintest hope. The outpost members, surrounded by the ruins of what they had once called a sanctuary, felt a deep, crushing despair. They were outnumbered, outmatched, and seemingly destined for defeat. Their hands tightened around their weapons, their hearts heavy with the imminent end. At that critical moment, the Alpha reached the outskirts of the outpost. From afar, it could see and feel the plight of its kin on the brink of annihilation. These Lycan were strong, but they were not of true blood, not like the Alpha. With a powerful leap, the Alpha threw itself into the path of the oncoming undead warriors. The wounded Lycan, near death and defeated, lay scattered and broken. Yet, as the Alpha roared, a sound so primal and powerful that it seemed to emanate from the very core of nature itself, they sensed something transformative. This roar wasn't just heard, it was felt, vibrating through every soul, every essence and life force present. It was a call to arms, a revival, a primal summons that no true Lycan could ignore. Suddenly, an incredible phenomenon occurred. The fallen Lycan began to stand, invigorated by a newfound strength, more primal and powerful than ever before. Even Lucan, shifting from his broken and wounded human form, screamed as he transformed. "For the Alpha!" he roared, his voice echoing the newfound resolve. A mystical connection formed among them, binding them to the Alpha. Their eyes blazed with primal rage, a mirror of the Alpha's own ferocity. As they rose, they tore through the undead army with renewed vigor and unrelenting force. Nothing seemed to stand in their way anymore. The Alpha entered the fray, its raw power unmatched by any force the undead could muster. With the Alpha leading them, the Lycan cleared the battlefield, each undead warrior falling one after another under their relentless assault. This unexpected resurgence changed the tide of battle. What seemed like an imminent defeat turned into a spectacular stand, a testament to the unyielding spirit and primal power of the Lycan under the true Alpha's lead. The battlefield, once a scene of despair, became a ground of triumphant resurgence as they reclaimed their home from the clutches of darkness. Perched from their hidden vantage point, Eldur and Serana watched the unfolding carnage with growing dread. The darkened shelter shielded them from the daylight, but not from the seismic shift occurring on the battlefield below. As the Alpha's presence became undeniable, a true blood Lycan radiating primal power, Eldur's face contorted in disbelief. "This can't be," he muttered, his voice a mixture of fear and astonishment. Serana, feeling the palpable shift in power, began to retreat into the shadows, her voice trembling. "A true blood will spell our doom. We should not have meddled with the undead," she warned, her eyes wide with fear. "The balance was disrupted. We shall now surely pay." "No," Eldur snapped, his voice hardened with resolve but edged with desperation. "The humans must pay. They forced me to suffer for years. They must pay," he insisted, refusing to accept the inevitable. Peering out once more, they saw the undeniable truth. Their undead army was being decimated. Serana, her confidence shattered, slowly backed away and vanished into the shadows, leaving Eldur to face the consequences alone. "Coward," he shouted after her, his voice echoing hollowly in the empty space. On the battlefield, the Alpha stood tall among the fallen undead. its breathing deep and rhythmic, filled with the scent of victory and the lingering stench of decay. It sensed the root of this conflict. Elder. With a slight motion of its head towards Fort Elder, it signaled the pack, and like a wave, they surged forward, unstoppable. Reaching Fort Elder, the Alpha and its pack encountered little resistance. The few remaining undead guards fell swiftly, like leaves in a storm. The Alpha, now surrounded by its newly formed pack, roared triumphantly, a sound that shook the very foundations of the fort. Emerging from the shadows, but still clinging to them, Elder appeared, his figure a mix of defiance and despair. Faced with this unstoppable primal force, he found himself helpless, his usual cunning and control stripped away, as he begged for his life, pleading, "I only did what I had to survive." His voice was tinged with a pathetic desperation. As the Alpha prepared to strike the final blow, a commanding voice filled the air, echoing around the ruins of the fort. "No," it thundered. "You must not disrupt the balance." This voice was more felt than heard, its authority undeniable. It was Lysander, the ancient Lycan god, whose will was as much a part of the land as the rocks and trees. The Alpha, recognizing the command, hesitated, and then, with a final look of disdain towards Elder, turned to leave. Elder, defeated and alone, received a commanding look from the Alpha, a silent order to abandon this place forever. Taking the only option left to him, Elder vanished into the shadows. His reign of terror ended as abruptly as it had begun. As the Alpha led its pack away from Fort Elder, a new era dawned for the Lycan and their allies. The balance had been restored, but at what cost? The battlefield lay quiet, a stark reminder of the brutal clash for survival. The world of the supernatural had been forever altered, and the consequences of these changes were yet to be fully understood. Outside the outpost, the Lycan pack, now fully under the Alpha's command, stood formidable and united. The remaining inhabitants of the outpost were busily clearing the aftermath of the battle, tending to the wounded and mourning the dead. Despite the destruction, there was a palpable sense of relief that the siege was over and they had survived, albeit barely. Captain Harris, bloodied and weary yet wearing a grateful smile, ran towards the pack, his arms open in thanks. "You did it!" he shouted joyously, but before he could get close, the remaining members of the wolf pack leapt in front of him, forming a protective barrier around the Alpha. They stood their ground, growling defensively at anyone who dared approach their leader. The captain stopped abruptly, shock registering on his face as he realized the change in the wolf pack. They were no longer just the allies he had known and fought alongside. They had transformed into true pack members, bound by a deeper, more primal loyalty to the Alpha. At that moment, Captain Harris wasn't sure if they were about to be slaughtered by the very saviors of the outpost. Lucan, now back in his human form, stepped forward to speak with Captain Harris, his expression somber. "We were never our true selves without the Alpha," Lucan explained. "The Alpha has unleashed our primal rage, our true nature. We will leave now. We follow the Alpha." Lucan continued, his voice firm yet filled with a hint of regret. "The Alpha will not take this place. Not because of us. We have asked him to spare this place at great risk to ourselves. Should you see the Alpha again, it will be the last thing you see." With those final words, the Alpha began to walk away, the power of its presence almost palpable in the air. The Wolfpack followed without hesitation, their steps resolute. They left the outpost and the survivors behind, disappearing into the wilderness that had called them back to their roots. As the figures of the pack faded into the distance, the survivors of the outpost stood in silence, watching them go. The departure of the Lycan pack marked the end of an era and the beginning of a new chapter for those left at the outpost. They were alone now, left to rebuild and fortify their home, knowing the world outside had changed irreversibly. The threat of the undead had been quelled, but the outpost was now starkly aware of the powerful forces at play in the world beyond their walls. The balance had shifted, and they could only wonder what the future would hold. As the dust settled and the last echoes of the departing Lycan pack faded into the distance, the survivors of the outpost faced the arduous task of returning to what was once Fort Haven. The fortress, a symbol of their resilience and unity, lay in partial ruin, a stark reminder of the recent siege and the relentless battles fought within and around its walls. The return was somber, yet determined. The survivors, led by Captain Harris and Commander Lewis, walked through the gates of Fort Haven, their eyes taking in the extent of the damage. The walls that had once stood proud and defiant were now marred by the scars of war, crumbled in parts, blackened by fire in others. "We will rebuild," Captain Harris declared as they gathered in the heart of the fort, amidst the rubble and remnants of their defences. The group around him, weary yet unbroken in spirit, nodded in agreement. Commander Lewis stepped forward, spreading out a set of blueprints on a makeshift table made from debris. "We need to rebuild, yes, but more importantly, we need to rethink our defences based on what we've learned," he said, pointing to the plans that now included new fortifications and traps designed specifically to counter undead assaults and deter any supernatural entities. "There are others out there," added a new voice, one of the younger leaders who had risen during the recent conflicts. "Other survivors, other enclaves. We need to find them, bring them here, or establish new outposts. We are stronger together, and our combined knowledge could make us a formidable force against any supernatural threats." The discussions moved swiftly from recovery to proactive strategies. The world had indeed changed, and with it, the nature of their existence had to evolve. They couldn't merely survive, they needed to thrive, to grow in power and understanding. The spectre of supernatural entities, undead, vampires, and werewolves, loomed large, a constant threat that could re-emerge at any time. "We must grow in power, power enough to defeat the supernatural should they return," Captain Harris said firmly, his gaze steady as he surveyed the group. "This isn't just about rebuilding walls, it's about fortifying our very existence." As the meeting concluded, the survivors dispersed to begin the work. Teams were formed, each with specific tasks, some to clear debris and repair damages, others to scout the surrounding areas for resources or potential allies. The air was filled with the sounds of construction, the clinking of metal, the sawing of wood, and the determined voices of people who had faced the darkness and lived to tell the tale. Fort Haven was coming back to life, slowly but surely. It was transforming not just in its physical form, but also in its purpose and resolve. As the sun set over the newly bustling fort, it cast long shadows and a glow of hope, a symbol that life at Fort Haven would not only continue, but would rise stronger and more prepared than ever before. Elder moved stealthily from shadow to shadow, the hunted becoming the hunter once more, though now he was merely a fugitive from powers he could neither match nor understand. "Elders, we are nothing more than insects," he murmured bitterly as he wandered through the desolate landscape. "The world has changed, but we have become the lowest on the scale, even lower than the humans." Finding solace in an abandoned old building that seemed to have once served as a storage unit for wood, Elder settled in. It was a place to rest, to reflect on the ruins of his ambitions and the fall of his kind. The sage Varric and the elders, all gone. What good are elders who cannot even defeat the humans? He lamented, his voice echoing in the hollow space. We were supposed to be the most powerful. What are we now? A handful of parasites running from humans and lichen. As he continued to brood over his fate and the apparent end of the Elder's era, he felt a profound sense of defeat. Maybe the time for Elders is over. Maybe my time is over. The lichen are too strong, the undead too vast, the humans too resourceful, and we, the Elders, once the proudest, most ancient and powerful of them all, are now nothing. This world is nothing. Just then, a noise like thunder shattered the silence, followed by a sensation of immense power breaking into the world from another realm. Elder, startled, looked up to see a powerful vision materialize before him, an imposing figure exuding regality and ancient strength. It was the Elder God, the vampire deity, whom Elder recognized with awe and fear. This god's appearance was regal, powerful, immortal. The reason you failed, Elder, is because you played with the power of another. The god spoke, his voice resonant and commanding. The undead deity, he continued, giving a name to the force Elder had recklessly tampered with. We do not need to borrow power from another. We are elders. Elder, feeling both chastened and desperate, questioned his god. What power do we have? What power have you given us? We cannot even defeat the lichen. The lichen were born to limit the spread of the elders in the days of the humans, the vampire god explained. While the humans once again rebuild their kind and begin to populate this world, the lichen are few. You, Elder, will spread the power of the elders. All this while, you never used your greatest power, the power to create new elders, transform the humans, their numbers grow. Do it while the lichen are still small in number. With those final words, the vision faded, leaving Elder alone once again. But now, a new plan was forming in his mind, a spark of ambition reignited. Could he be the true savior of the elders? Was he destined to be the new sage, the one to restore the elders to their former glory? As the realization settled, Elder felt a surge of purpose. This was not the end, but perhaps a new beginning. He stood up, his resolve hardened, ready to embrace this daunting task. If the elders were to rise again, it would be by his hand, and through the power he had neglected, the power to create, to transform, to dominate. Elder, now fully embracing his ancient heritage and newly awakened purpose, hid in the shadows of the farm, a place he had covertly turned into his sanctuary and hunting ground. This was no ordinary farm. Unbeknownst to its human inhabitants, it had become a feeding ground for a vampire. Night after night, Elder moved like a ghost among them, drawing sustenance with such subtlety that his presence went unnoticed. The humans, attributing their constant sickness and weakness to the hardships of their new world, were unaware of the predator in their midst. Tonight, however, Elder's actions would shift from parasitic survival to a deliberate act of creation. He watched from the darkness as one of the farm's inhabitants, a man named Thomas, prepared for bed. Thomas, like the others, had no idea of the true cause of his nightly fatigue. Once Thomas had settled into bed and fallen into a deep sleep, Elder silently emerged from the shadow. With a predator's precision, Elder approached the bedside. He paused, observing Thomas's unsuspecting face. then leaned down and began to feed. Unlike his usual careful sips, this time he drained Thomas completely, absorbing the very essence of his life until there was nothing left. Once Thomas lay pale and still, Elder took a sharp object and made a small cut on his own finger. He allowed his dark, potent blood to drip into Thomas's mouth, an act that was both ritualistic and deliberate. He whispered ancient words under his breath, words that carried the weight of centuries of power and darkness. After some time, as the moon cast its pale light through the window, Thomas's eyes suddenly snapped open. They shone with an unnatural light, the first sign of his transformation. Elder, standing over him with a mix of paternal pride and dark anticipation, welcomed him to his new existence. "Welcome, brother," Eldor said softly, his voice carrying an assurance of their shared destiny. "We are the first of a new beginning." Thomas sat up, confusion and realization crossing his features as he touched his throat, feeling the lingering pain of Eldor's bite. His life as a human was over, but his existence as something far more powerful had just begun. Outside, the night air was still, as if nature itself was holding its breath, watching the birth of this new dark force. Eldor knew that the process he had started this night would not be isolated. It was the first step in a larger plan, a strategy to rebuild the ranks of the Elders and restore their dominance in a world that had nearly forgotten them. As he guided Thomas, now his progeny, through the first hours of his new life, Elder felt a renewed sense of purpose. The world had indeed changed, but he was determined to ensure that the Elders would not only adapt, but also rise to reign once again. This farm was just the beginning. Elder, feeling invigorated by his newfound direction, employed his shadow influence to search the dark corners of the world for Serana. "Serana, are you there? I know you can hear me," he called out into the void, his voice a resonant thread woven into the fabric of the shadows. "Things have changed. We can win again," he declared, his tone infused with a renewed sense of purpose and certainty. After a moment of silence that stretched through the shadows, Serana materialized. Her emergence from the darkness was cautious, her expression one of wary suspicion. "If this is some type of trick to get revenge, Elder, it will not work," she stated firmly, her eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of deceit. What she saw, however, left her momentarily speechless. Standing around Elder were 5 new Elders, recently transformed, their eyes glowing with the nascent power of their vampiric heritage. "What is this?" Serana asked, her voice a mixture of disbelief and intrigue. Elder looked around at his newly created kin, his expression one of pride and determination. He then turned his gaze back to Serana, ready to unveil his vision. "This," he began, his voice rising with the fervor of his beliefs, "is the rebirth of our kind. For too long, we Elders have skulked in the shadows, scavenging scraps of power, fearing the world and its changes. We have used the powers of others, relied on manipulations and deceptions, when all the while we held the greatest power within ourselves." He stepped forward, his aura of leadership more pronounced than ever. "Our rightful place is not at the fringes of this world, Serana. It is at the very top as the dominant species. We are the night's true rulers, and it's time we reclaimed that birthright." Elder's voice grew more passionate as he continued. "We have been held back, trapped by old fears and old wars, but now..." He paused, his gaze sweeping over his new creations before settling on Serana. "I will set us all free. No longer will we be shadows, fearing the light. We will be the darkness that swallows it." Serana, looking at the conviction in Eldor's eyes and the unmistakable power radiating from the new Elders, felt a stirring of something long dormant within her, a spark of ambition and a reminder of their true nature. Elder's words resonated with a part of her that she had suppressed in the face of recent defeats. "Is this truly possible?" she asked, the skepticism in her voice now tinged with a curious hope. "Yes," Elder affirmed, stepping closer to her. "With these new elders, and many more to come, we will build an army not of undead pawns, but of true elders. We will not hide from the world. We will rule it." As the night wind whispered through the trees around them, a new chapter for the elders began to unfold, one that promised power, domination, and a return to the glory of their darkest days. Elder and Sarana, united by a common vision, looked out into the night, ready to forge their path of resurgence, no longer as survivors, but as sovereigns. As the dusk settled into the deep blue of night, the landscape of the supernatural and human world was quietly shifting. The Alpha and its revitalized wolf pack, now embracing their primal essence, roamed the wilderness. Their newfound power and wild nature posed a stirring question. What threats might they bring to a world still reeling from chaos? Their fierce independence and raw strength made them unpredictable, a wild card in the ever-evolving game of power. Elsewhere, the undead, though momentarily quelled, remained a lurking danger. Not all had fallen to the might of the Wolfpack, and their numbers, while reduced, still whispered of the potential for resurgence. These creatures of decay, under no one's control, could once again rise to form a menacing army of the night. Meanwhile, Eldor's actions had set a new narrative in motion for the Elders. As they grew in number and strength, their ambition to dominate the night and reclaim their ancient supremacy posed a formidable threat. With Eldor and Sarana at the helm, the Elders were no longer mere shadows of the past. They were a growing force, driven by a vision to rule over all. The humans, ever resilient, continued to rebuild amidst these supernatural tumults. Their communities, strengthened by adversity, were expanding, their defenses bolstered by the knowledge of the threats that prowled in the darkness. Yet, as they grew in number and fortitude, the question remained: would they be ready to face a world where the night was alive, with more than just shadows? And then there was Winter, the mysterious figure who had orchestrated the rise of the Alpha. His motivations remained as obscured as his actions. Was his manipulation of the Alpha merely a move in a larger, more sinister plan? Or was there a deeper purpose to his interventions, one that might yet reveal a new threat or an unexpected ally? As the curtain falls on this chapter of the Crimson Dawn, these questions hang in the air, heavy with the promise of answers and the inevitability of confrontation. The supernatural entities, each with their agendas and ancient powers, are set to collide in a struggle that could reshape the boundaries between night and day, human and supernatural. Stay tuned for Crimson Dawn, Episode 7, coming soon, where the fates of the Alpha, the Elders, the Undead, and the humans will converge in a tale of power, betrayal, and survival in the shadow of the ever-watchful night.